Hey everyone, this is Peter, and this week I'll be showing you my process for painting tiling roof shingle texture. So first things first, we will go up to File and create a square document. I'm using 2048 by 2048, 300 pixels per inch. And then from here, I want my roof shingles to be like a blue wood texture. I'm referencing a texture by Ulrich Wehry. So I'm going to fill the background with blue and begin outlining these rectangular shingle shapes. So I've drawn some horizontal lines just to get the proportions right, and then I'm going for like a square rectangular look, and these tiles in general don't have to be, well actually it's better if they are a little bit irregular, and it makes them somewhat more interesting. And some tiles can be smaller, some can be longer and fatter, but just in general you don't want anything that sticks out too much. And here we're going to go filter other offset in order to make it tileable. So you'll see some seams pop up in between your line work, so you want to blend the seams together, and we'll be doing this process throughout the whole painting, just to make sure everything matches up when we go to tile it. So once you're finished with this step, don't forget to repeat the filter offset, and you'll keep going through that as we paint this roof texture. So I'm just kind of blending some lines together and making sure my outlines are varying thicknesses, because that's going to help make it more dynamic and interesting. So we'll add some cast shadows from the shingles above each row, and you could call these cast shadows. We'll be getting to occlusion shadows later, but cast shadows in general, this is where the light shines down and the shingles cast a shadow on objects below them. So it's important to get this step down because we want it to feel three-dimensional instead of more flat. So from here, we will texture the shingles with vertical brush strokes with varying opacity. So if you watched my wood tutorial, this is the same step. Just painting some rough brush strokes. They don't have to be super specific right now, but just to get that texture, and because I'm imagining these are shingles made out of wood. So there will be cracks as well, because these are maybe an older painted wood here. So it's gonna have splitting from it, like the weathering going on. It's going to have different cracks, and just the wood grain in general would be vertically. So it's going to be showing that. So here you just take that darker color and go up and down with your shingles until you're happy with the cracks that you have. And of course, if your roof shingles are a different texture or a different material, like stone or maybe corrugated metal, then of course things are going to look rather different. You might not have these this same vertical texturing. You might have some more spherical or shiny sheen to it if it's metal. Now, but I'm imagining that these were each handcrafted out of like a plank of wood or something, and then painted blue. So that's where we have this blue color. And you can just look at a lot of references for cracks and wood grain, and notice that like the splitting and the cracks will be larger and wider at the ends and thinner in the middle. And you want to make sure that your cracks and that they're more dynamic than just single lines going through the wood. And here I've defined a light source. I'm saying it's coming from the upper left-hand corner, and so along each of the darker ends I'm going to paint a highlight. So this will be on the left side of each shingle, since that's where the light's coming from. But and you wouldn't see that brighter highlight on the right side, just because the light's not coming from that direction. So we can use a different color to paint in details on that side, but for now we're just hitting that left hand side with a brighter color. And it doesn't have to be pure white. In fact, since it's wood, it's not it's not super shiny like metal, but we're just going to use like a lighter blue compared to the dark blue that we painted in. And what we'll want to do eventually here is make these make each tile angled a little bit. And this is going to be the tricky part, because right now everything that we've done makes them look very flat. This is a very 2D texture. It looks like each tile is sort of like wafer thin, and it doesn't give that same sense of depth. But by adding these highlights and shadows, that's one thing that will help to trick our eyes into saying, oh, this is actually a three-dimensional texture. And of course, if you sculpted the texture and had your specular maps and ambient occlusion and everything, like you could have, or your normal maps, I mean, then you could have all sorts of maps to add to your 3D model. But for this purpose, we'll just be hand painting. So you might notice I'm adding a little bit of a gradient in some areas. Like I'll paint an edge brighter blue color and then take the darkest blue and run over it a little bit. So that's just to give us a sense of where the shadows might be. And you can actually see me taking a tiny dark brush and painting in some line work. And in the end, we don't want our texture to have lines, but we want the lines to symbolize the occlusion shadows, where two objects are touching and creating a darker surface. So now I will add some spots in the wood for additional detail. And this is just me imagining maybe there might be a banged up part of the wood, and maybe it's near the edge where things have impacted the roof, and there will be this dented circle shape. And that'll depend on, again, on your texture. If it's metal, maybe it's spotted from rust, but from wood, looking at my references and things, I see that there will be little pock marks and these little dents, possibly from things hitting the shingles or hail or something. Who knows? But this is an area for you to distinguish the age of your wood. So maybe this is like an older roof texture. Maybe could be several decades old and is in badly need of repair. But you can show the wear and tear and kind of tell a story with your painting here. And I'm just using a tiny brush right now to detail some of the highlight edges and make it pop a little bit more. And the one thing that we're missing, though, is that that sense that some of the tiles are angled towards us or away from us. So right now the light is hitting them pretty much directly, but if we add some intense shadows with the burn tool, then we can give some of that dynamic shape. So anything that we hit with the burn tool is more angled away from us, or it's deeper. The grooves might be deeper there. So and then you can do the opposite, add thin the highlights with the dodge tool, and you might see me I'll be hitting the edges as well with like a larger brush, a larger dodge tool, just to add some more contrast. But you should experiment with both the dodge and the burn tools, and I have this one set to midtones, and the exposure is not very high, so we don't want to blow out the contrast too much. And the one problem with this is that because we're using a soft brush to get that sort of shadowy or bloom feeling, it's going to lose some of our hard lines and hard edges. So what we're going to have to do is go in, zoom in and detail out a little bit more. So I'm taking like a tiny, what is this, like a size 20 brush, just going in and painting some of those darker shadows where the light really isn't reaching. And of course you'll want to make sure that you go filter offset, because this is going to mess up the tiling a little bit. But if you think some tiles, they're going to be like butting up right against each other. They're going to be making strong occlusion shadows, and there will be not much of a cast shadow, but some tiles might be lifted a little bit. They might be angled or warped from the rain or something, so they're going to be casting more of a shadow, and that will be something that I really need to fix later on here, but I'll show you that. So here I'm just taking the dodge tool again because I realized, hey, there's not enough contrast here, and I want it to be a little bit more interesting. So I made those edges brighter, and then it's never be afraid to go over to image adjustments and tweak the brightness and contrast of your image. So I went and used I increased the brightness, or didn't touch the brightness much. I decreased the contrast though and messed with the saturation. And then what you'll need to do here to make this even more interesting is create a new layer in the hue blending mode, and then paint on that layer with some slightly different colors. So right now it was all like this very sky blue color, but I wanted to introduce a little bit of purple and green, since those are all in the cool color spectrum. So I guess it's less of a green and more of a teal color, but and I've blown out the colors dramatically to show you what I'm doing here, and then I eventually go down and knock down the opacity and make it less saturated, but because I just want that subtle variation that we see in Ulrich Rari's texture. So I'm gonna zoom in and start refining those edges, and this is like by far the most tedious process because or the most tedious part of the process, just because you've got your main shapes in, and truth be told, if you like when you change the size of your texture like to 256 by 256 or whatnot, it'll just you'll lose a lot of that detail anyway. But I wanted to crisp up the lines a little bit and make sure everything is purposeful, since when we did use that dodge tool and the burn tool, it made everything kind of fuzzy. And one thing I've been playing around with this texture on this texture is adding some like a little bit of cross hatching, and you'll see that pop up in a little bit here. But I wanted to add a very painted feel to it, and if you keep painting this and keep getting accurate lighting, it's going to look more and more realistic and start to move away from hand painted. But I wanted to maintain that sort of hand painted look, and so I made my brush strokes very apparent, and I'm not blending things together very much, with the exception of like those gradients on the edges. So you see I'm doing a little bit of hash marks here and there, and using a lighter color so they stand out, and that's just to help texturize it and bring out that style that I want. So you keep doing that pretty much section by section, and I'm really trying not to zoom in until the very end of the video here, because I want you to know that you can do it all zoomed out to fit the screen, and you want to use go larger to smaller. So don't worry about the details like this at first. You want to actually use those larger brushes, get in the bold shapes of each shingle before you go into like do these little lines. And overall, if I had one critique of this texture that I'm doing right now, I would say it's got too many deep cracks and things, and you probably don't want it to stand out that much, just because it looks a little busy. If I had to say anything, it looks a little too busy. So, but in general, you can learn from my mistakes and maybe make a better texture, which I'd love to see. If any of you make textures based on these videos, I would love to see them posted as video responses or send them to my email or something. But Anyways, so I'm kind of going around here and adding some more texture, and we did the color stage first just because now you can paint with those purples and greens that we've got in there, and really make it feel you want to manage it a little bit so it doesn't feel like it was an accident. Like it's good to have happy accidents to get your working textures and creativity across, but it's nice to see things were purposeful. So you made purposeful decisions in your artwork. Your lines were you can leave some of the happier accidents to concept art, but for here we want to say, all right, each brush stroke is there for a reason. It's representing something. So the cracks that we place are there for a reason, and the hatch marks that we make are there for a reason as well. So that's one thing that I think it will show if you just use the burn and the dodge tool, because if you leave it fuzzy, and if you leave all your brush strokes unmanaged and untouched, then it's gonna come across as a little bit lazy. But and don't be afraid to use the hard brush, and that's one thing I see a lot of people who are just getting started with painting doing. It's that you might use the soft brush, because I think the hard brush is just like for making line work and things. And if you're using a Wacom tablet, you can actually, make sure to utilize the pen pressure, because you can see I've got my brush set to different opacities. As I'm pressing down on the brush, it's creating different boldness of strokes. So for those dark cracks, I'm pressing down much harder than like with some of the cross hatching, for example. And that emulates like a pencil or a real brush a lot more. But yeah, so I'm just zooming out here and cleaning up some things. And what you'll notice is that I go and I adjust the colors again. I could make it more of a wood color if I wanted to. I can make it an orange or a brown. And depending on your game, maybe you want it to be very high contrast. But in general, I do not. I want it to be fairly muted, fairly desaturated. And one thing I noticed when, because I went to tile this again, and one thing I noticed is that it doesn't have those strong cast shadows anymore. Somehow I lost those when I did the adjustments and decreased the contrast, so I'm going to need to go back in and add some of those here. So it's okay to paint directly on the same layer. You don't need to worry about working in multiple layers right now. And you could leave that for more of the concept pieces that we're going to be working on. So just make sure you hit those with a darker color, get those cast shadows coming across. And in fact, this almost looks like some sort of dragon scale or something. I bet you could do something very similar for like a dragon scales. But I had wood textures in mind, wood tiles in mind when I made this, so that's what we'll stick with. And you definitely want to make sure you're always offsetting, especially when you paint something along the edges, because it's not going to match up with the other side. So when you go to tile, that'll be super apparent. And then the other mistake that I noticed here was I needed to add some more of the highlighted edges, because the lighting didn't feel very strong. And again, we're not even touching white. It looks like a bright edge, but it's nowhere near white, because we already have a darker palette, so any lighter blues and greens that we're using will look white enough. And if you feel something isn't bright enough, then you can use the dodge tool, or you can use the dodge tool or the burn tool to knock it down. And I just keep adjusting here until finally I'm going to edit, define texture, and then, edit, define pattern. And then if you go to new fill layer, see layer, new fill layer pattern, then you can see what it looks like when you tile it. And that just pointed out that I have a little mistake. So if you see when I'm going back and forth here, fixing a little detail at the edge because I'm looking for those areas where I didn't quite get the seam right. But once you get that, then you're good to go. So let me know. Oh, there it is. See? Yeah, there you go. Fixed. And we're good. But yeah, let me know how this different format's going. I said, all right, maybe the little quick tutorial will be 3 minutes in the beginning. But in general, good luck, happy painting, and I'll see you next week.